Okay, good morning, everyone, or afternoon to those in different time zone. I am Jamie Adams. I'm the Communications Officer for the African Climate Action Partnership. The African Climate Action Partnership is a network for peer learning, technical collaboration, and information exchange. So on behalf of AfCAP and the GCF-funded GIZ program, we'd like to welcome you all to our webinar on ICS and Climate Finance, Synergizing Efforts for Sustainable Development today. But before we begin, I would like to just note that we will be having live interpretation happening between English and French. So if you are French speaking or English speaking, there's instructions on how you can operate the interpretation function on Zoom. You will see an interpretation button either in your Zoom window at the bottom, or you will have to go to the More Options button, and then you will see interpretation. And once you selected interpretation, you can choose which interpretation channel you would like to join, whether it is English or French. Once you have selected the language, you will hear 80% of the original meeting audio and 20%, 20% of the original audio and 80% of the language you selected. And if you want to mute or unmute the original audio, you will click on the corresponding option in the language button to mute original audio. I will also put the instructions in French for those who struggle with English. I'll just put it on the screen for a few seconds, but my colleague will include the instructions in the chat for you all to see the instructions once I move from the slide. So before we begin, I would kindly like to ask everyone if you are able to just please introduce yourselves in the chat box with your name, your institution, and the country you are from, so we can get an idea of who's in the room. And then just a few housekeeping rules for the Zoom webinar. I please ask that you all keep your microphones muted during presentations and only unmute during Q&A sessions or the plenary sessions. And could I also ask that everyone keeps their videos off, as some people have network strains when everyone's video cameras are on. And when you do have questions or pressing questions, please submit these questions in the Q&A box or the chat box, and then we will address those questions during the Q&A sessions. During the Q&A session, we will enable you to raise your hand and unmute yourself so that you can ask your question to the relevant presenter. And on another note, please note that this meeting is being recorded, just so that you know. From here, I would like us to just have a bit of an icebreaker before we begin with the meeting proceedings. So I kindly ask if we can all just join this Mentimeter. You'll see this, you can either scan the QR code on the screen or join in your desktop browser using mentimeter.com and then using the code above. The link will be also shared in the chat by my colleague Nina. So if you need to access the link quickly, you can use that. So our first question from the icebreaker will be, the first question on the Mentimeter is to drop a pin on the location you're currently based in, so we can get an idea of where everyone is located in the world during this webinar. So if you are struggling to join, please let us know so we can try and assist you. A couple of moments so I can get more people adding their pins to this map. I see most of us are based in Africa. A lot of us are based in sub-Saharan Africa. Okay, I will share the results of this at the end of the webinar as part of postcoms, but I think we should move on because of time. The second icebreaker question is, what are you most excited about to learn during this webinar? Is it on climate financing mechanisms, climate financing opportunities for clean energy projects, climate finance landscape, or is it on establishing clean cooking NDC targets to unlock climate finance? I see people are excited about the climate financing mechanisms, the climate finance landscape. See, there's a great interest on climate finance mechanisms. Okay, I'll leave the Mentimeter open. And because of time, I would like to move on. And it's so good to know that everyone is mostly interested in climate finance mechanisms. And I hope the presentations from our presenters today will inform you and share some insights on the opportunities and the available climate financing mechanisms that are available out there. So thank you for all participating in our Mentimeter. I'll move on from here now. I'd like to just thank you all for partaking in the icebreaker, and I would like to pass over to my colleague Anya Strauman, who is one of the implementation managers of the GCF project on the promotion of climate-friendly cooking in Kenya, implemented by GIZ, and she'll be giving a brief introduction and overview of today's webinar. So thank you, Anya.
Thank you very much, Jamie, for having broken the ice and for your nice introduction. Welcome also from my side to everyone to today's webinar on ICS and Climate Finance. We are very delighted to have you join us for hopefully exciting discussion on accelerating clean and improved cooking solutions through climate finance. The session is part of a webinar series, as Jamie mentioned, hosted by South-South-North as part of the African Climate Action Partnership and our GCF-funded GIZ program, Promotion of Climate-Friendly Cooking in Kenya and Senegal. And today we're focusing on innovative financing models and how they can support the adoption of ICS, how they can reduce emissions and enhancing health and economic outcomes. In our 1.5 session, we'll cover two main topics. First, we are looking into accessing climate finance for clean and improved cooking interventions. Here we'll explore the unfortunately not always easy pathways to secure climate finance and its role in scaling up ICS adoption. And in a second part, we look at how NDC targets can drive climate financing. So this segment will feature a deep dive into the Green Climate Fund project, promotion of climate-friendly cooking in Kenya and Senegal, as mentioned. And we will examine how project targets can be linked to NDC targets. So we're thrilled to have a very diverse audience here, contributing to sustainable development and climate action, ranging from policymakers to practitioners and advocates. So very much looking forward to also a discussion at the end of those two presentations. If you have questions during the presentations, please keep them in your head. There will be each time a slot after every presentation for a Q&A. Please also note, Jamie already explained it, that live interpretation is available in both languages, in English and French, to make this session accessible to all. So thank you again for joining us. And with that, let's begin with the first presentation by Nishchai Mehrotra. He's actually an expert on energy solutions for displacement settings, but here today he's in his role as a co-speaker of the GIZ, our GIZ sector network, Energy in Sub-Saharan Africa. He has a background in sustainability and climate change and has more than 7 years of experience in the energy and climate sector. Dear Nishchai, I'm looking forward to your presentation. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Anya. I hope I'm audible.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's a great opportunity to talk about these topics. And yeah, I also welcome all who are interested into this topic and wants to, take part in this discussion, the important discussion on the cooking energy and the climate finance, if it's relevant, also climate finance in this sector. And when we started this conversation around looking into specificities on the climate finance topic, the more motivation or the demand was, the interest was in knowing if it can work for the cooking energy sector, because cooking energy, as we know, is also a very complex topic. It's not only about the clean cooking energy, which has a lot fewer emissions attached to it, but it's also about improved cooking solutions, which has certain amount of emissions attached to it. So we were interested into looking more, have a detailed aspect into these topics. I will just start with an introduction of just give an introduction or the context of a study we did in terms of finding these climate finance opportunities and how relevant climate finance is in cooking energy sector, and then we can have a look at the study we did. So just for the context for the speakers, what I'm going to present today is more relates to an internal GIZ review. It was more specifically attached to the sector network energy, of which I'm a part of. And there was from the sector network energy within GIZ, it's more like a knowledge exchange platform and it has members from different projects, energy projects within Sub-Saharan Africa, to exchange on different topics in terms of energy access, electrification, biomass energy, and overarching topics like climate change and sustainability. And we represent the biomass working group and work mostly biomass side of the things, and also including cooking energy. And when we have discussions in our, I hope you can still hear me. I see there are some internet issues, but when we did these conferences and exchanges, knowledge exchange sessions, there was a need from different experts, energy experts, to know more about climate finance and put a perspective that how climate finance can work, if there are opportunities for climate finance to be utilized for cooking projects, if there are resources available to support energy experts. And a lot of energy experts need not necessarily be involved in the discussions around climate side of things. So we thought to bridge these two topics and provide a brief connection of the importance of climate finance. So if we can move to next slide. Now that we have established the context, I hope that this internal review can also help different colleagues and different organizations into thinking about and reflect on their own approach of I mean, the agenda of the look on the landscape of climate finance, just to connect these two topics, climate finance and cooking. And then we'll have a brief overview of the study we did in terms of finding these climate finance opportunities, and also see a few pointers on how to access them. Thank you. If you could, yeah. I mean, when we talk about climate finance, definitely, as we all know, that the requirement is quite high of the climate finance we need for implementing climate action. It can be climate mitigation, it can be climate adaptation, and it's also true for the cooking energy sector, where almost half of the global population does not have access to modern cooking energy services. We can see the gap, that what's needed and what's currently being delivered. Next slide, please. I mean, when we talk about cooking projects, definitely, when we talk about climate finance, it relates more to the clean cooking aspect, but because of the mitigation potential of clean cooking energy projects. But we still need to keep in mind that improved cooking is very much the reality in the countries where there are not enough supply chains for clean cooking. So we try to also incorporate this factor that there can be different projects and different project pipelines, but still there's also possibility to access climate finance for these projects. And we see also maybe in the next presentation when we talk about GCF project, that how this works. But now I will try to just give a brief overview. We also talk about when we establish these relationships between climate and cooking, we had to also include that focus on that there are certain climate policies which also affect the cooking landscape within a country. These are the nationally determined contributions, the so-called NDCs that these countries have. If we go to the next slide, we'll know that what are some of the examples of how this look like actually those countries who have actually cooking energy targets inbuilt into their NDCs, like Nepal, with 50% of households using clean cooking, like electric e-cooking. And we see also Rwanda with the target of a dissemination of modern efficient cook stoves to 80% of rural population and 50% of urban population. We have Haiti with 32% by 2030, and also we have Kenya, which later we'll see that with the new policies, the focus is moving also on cooking energy sector and the mitigation potential it has to avoid carbon emissions. Next slide, please. So talking again about the climate finance, some of the trends that over the last few years we have seen that the overall climate finance has been increasing, and it's increasing and available for different sectors to access. We have also the regional segregation based on how much climate finance is available, also domestic and international. Just to give an overview that there is more discussion on these topics overall, that we need more climate finance is still, I think, some of you who are engaged in the climate side of things and know that the COP is going to be organized in the next month, in the next few days. We know the importance of this topic, and um, yeah, it's not to say that what's the trend in terms of cooking energy sector, because sometimes it's very challenging to track and get the data, sector-specific data, especially of cooking energy. But still, the good news is that we have more climate finance flowing, and then we need to have discussions on how this climate finance can be better utilized and how projects can be developed in a way to access more climate finance. Next slide, please. Yes, now that we have seen the landscape, that's a quick snapshot on how climate finance, what are the gaps in terms of climate finance. We'll see more in terms of which kind of opportunities are available potentially, and also moving towards towards the project side, how projects can identify these opportunities in a way which is which is efficient and increases the chance of getting climate funding for their projects. Next slide, please. Let me know, Anya, if I'm audible, or if there is any issue with the presentation. But yeah, I will move ahead.
From my side, you're audible, and we can also see the slides. But if this is not the case for everyone, please let us know in the chat or orally.
Yeah, I'm happy to move forward, and definitely we can discuss if we have any questions from the audience. But yeah, I mean, we again talking about that we did this internal review because there was a demand from our members, the energy experts, that just to give also a brief overview of where we can access climate finance. And so we decided, we had a consultant on board, Climate Focus. You can see their logo on the slides as well. They helped us to review these climate funds and also see some of the characteristics or to analyze the suitability for projects, cooking energy projects. These are done keeping the GIZ context in mind, the development agency context. But I hope the audience who come from diverse sectors or topics, they can also relate with that and maybe find something useful. So what the funds we included were mostly, or the consultants reviewed were above 250,000 euros. They were more international or regional in scope, and they included both clean and improved cooking technology as part of projects which can be funded and suitable for project development. The funds we excluded were more in terms of loan and debt, and the funds which are connected to the fossil fuel cooking technologies, and also who are under sanctions. So we excluded these kind of funds. So if you move to the next slide, we can see a snapshot of funds we included. We categorize them as less suitable, suitable, and highly suitable. And again, just to mention that it was done from GIZ perspective, so it's probable that for another organization it looks different. The priority looks different, and we'll see that it's very context specific how you review the funds, and how you identify a fund for your own project. And yeah, we'll look into more detail later. But for now, just from the GIZ perspective, these we find these funds were suitable some to a higher degree, some to a lesser degree, and the parameters which helped us to decide this kind of suitability were more in terms of if the fund priorities were aligned, those of clean GIZ, clean cooking projects like the GIZ, we still have a lot of experience in terms of developing these kind of cooking projects and implementing them, mostly from the funding we get from our government donors, from German government. So based on these experiences, past experiences, and the project pipelines we have developed, and matching on to the information on the kinds of projects which these funds have funded in the past, we try to take it as a factor that what mostly aligns can be identified as a suitable fund. And the priority was also given in terms of funds which has already experience funding GIZ projects, financing GIZ projects. So they got a higher priority because usually if the funds have experience with one organization, it's a good sign, and adds to the advantage in our review that the chances are higher that the financing will be considered if there is a new project from the same organization. And we see overall if the funds have experience in financing cooking energy projects, and also how much information is available online from the funds, because when you yourself try to map out for your context and try to identify the funds, I think you need this kind of information, what projects have been funded in the past, and if there are any other projects developed in that region, and we'll look more into that detail, and this information, if this is available online, so it helps definitely to identify which funds would be more suitable for your context. If you go to the next slide. Yeah, so now we have established that there is certain funds which are available. We have the resources. It's now from the project developer side, from the energy expert side, that how we go about identifying these funds, and that was the demand from our sector network members as well. And we'll have a look at a brief evaluation checklist we developed. We recommend. It's very logical. It's not to say that you have to be an expert in terms of climate finance, but still there's a it's good to have these few points in mind so that there is a good chance that you identify a suitable fund for your own project context. Next slide, please. So what we identified, or our consultants reviewed for us, that these are few questions which are very important before we go about identifying these climate funds and setting the process to apply for these funds. These are basic questions that if the award amount meet the project requirements. In past, if the fund has financed with that particular amount which you need for your project pipeline, and if there are if the type of financing which is awarded meet your project needs, if your project which you are developing meet the fund's eligibility criteria, because it's very important to go through every eligibility criteria before you apply for these funds, because we have known that certain funds, especially the bigger ones, require a lot of resources and time and effort to prepare the proposals. And if the project doesn't meet any criteria, even single criteria, that's a negative point, and likely that the project will not meet the minimum funding requirements. So this is very important. Also, the time frame, in which time frame you will get the money, and also what is the suitable time frame for your project implementation, and if they align. And yeah, does the project have resources to put together the funding bid, and if there are technical and financial resources available for developing the project, developing the proposal for this climate funding. If you go to the next slide. So we'll just have a look in terms of a bit into more detail in terms of what I just mentioned, that there are separate funds and known to have um, yeah, different amounts, varying amounts available to fund different projects. And definitely, if you see on the other side, there's Green Climate Fund and Global Environment Facility, which are known in the past to fund bigger projects, more suitable to bigger project proposals. And if we see on the other side, we know that there are also smaller funds which are more suited to smaller structures. Next slide, please. And it can be also that based on the climate finance instrument you prefer for your project context, it helps you to identify which fund has already preferred these kind of financial instruments as part of project implementation. So it's a good, maybe a sign that you have more chances to access the funding. These are some of the funding we reviewed under the study. These can be project grants or co-financing grants or results-based payments or blended finance. And there are different funds, as you can see on the screen, which have funded the projects utilizing these kind of financial instruments in the past. So it gives us a good sign when you talk about applying for financing your project. Next slide, please. So as said, the eligibility criteria is definitely very important to have a look. So when you apply for such kind of climate finance, have a look at the focus area. If the fund has already listed that region or the sector here, for example, as one of the focus area which they try to prioritize in the next few years. So this is a good sign if food, agriculture, cooking energy is mentioned as part of one of these focus areas. Also region and countries, it applies that if they are also interested into funding, for example, Eastern Africa or Sub-Saharan Africa in general, to fund projects implemented in these countries, and also to consider safeguards like gender, which is a very important aspect, and also different safeguards in terms of climate, environment, if they're already there, considered in the project pipeline. If these information is usually mentioned on the climate fund websites, and then it's good to focus also on these aspects when while preparing the project proposal. And definitely innovative and transformative projects get a bit more priority in terms of getting these funds. And I mean, when we eligibility criteria is definitely one of the most important aspect, because we have also interviewed a few colleagues who had experience in terms of climate financing, and this was also emphasized a lot. And it makes sense that because such funds have different eligibility criteria and different focus areas, it's also important to consider all of these aspects into your project proposal. Yes, and this is a snapshot of what I discussed, and it talks about also the time frame in terms of from ideation to project development till the implementation and reporting of results. How this aligns with the timeline, what's mentioned on Climate Fund's website, or what's mentioned, or what's we can see from the past projects which this particular fund has financed. And there can be differences also from the early stage projects or the final, more at the later stage projects in terms of when you get access the financing. Okay, resources is also an important aspect when we reviewed these case studies and also interviewed people. We found that certain funds need more resources in terms of development for a proposal, and it can also take a long time to kind of prepare the proposal and submit it and get the approval, formal approval. These can be we found Mitigation Action Fund, Global Environment Facility, and Green Climate Fund, more of the larger end of the amount side, which require more thorough application process. So I think for us means that those structures which have more resources available, technical as well as financial, are more suited to these kind of funds which require more effort. Next slide, please. Yes. I mean, further considerations, as I said, if the countries has good climate policies, if the cooking energy sector is integrated into the NDCs, it's a good sign for certain funds as well, that these structures are already available, that the climate policies are there, that the priorities there from the government structures as well, that that we can attract more climate finance into the country or into the region. And definitely there are some different monitoring and reporting requirements for particular fund, and it's good that we have these monitoring and reporting structures available, which helps us to increases the chances to get to access the climate finance. And if you go to the next slide, yes, I mean, in general, again, to mention that climate finance opportunities are available. It's very challenging in different sectors to access these opportunities, especially cooking energy sector and especially improved cooking side of things. But we have seen also in the last few conferences that it's certainly possible. We just need to focus more on the eligibility criteria and develop a project pipeline which integrates different aspects like gender, sustainability, environment impact, and then it increases the chances basically to get climate finance for cooking energy sector. I just mentioned the others, the consultants who did the review for us, and the GISF team involved in this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nishai, for your highly interesting insights into the climate finance landscape, as well and into the different finance mechanisms. I think you provided really concrete and hands-on recommendations to this landscape. Coming to the questions, please put your questions to the chat or open your mic and raise your hand. Nishai is available for anything not being clear or for any further explanation. There was one question in the chat from Erloj Kamara. I think it was related to slide 10. If you could go back to this one. The question was, I think, if the categories are related to the source of financing or to the destination. Please, this camera, correct me if I'm wrong. If the person could just repeat the question directly, that would be great.
Hello. Hello, good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Page 10.
Yes. So the
Go ahead.
question is related to the slide. I don't know if it's a slide 10, but it's the graph, the CPI data that you mentioned. You said that it was related to the the slide after this one. Yes, this one.
Okay.
This one. The right one, yes. I just want to confirm whether those figures are related to the destination of climate financing, or if it's just the origin.
Sorry, I couldn't get the name of the speaker, but thanks for the question. If I understand by destination, you mean does it relate to the cooking energy sector? Or what's exactly meant by destination? I mean, here the data represents more the climate finance, which Yes. Yeah, we can hear you if you or before, but not you're not audible right now. You, Logan, if I
Yes, maybe I'll take it in English. The question is to know whether the figures that you mentioned on this slide are
yeah.
they related to the source of financing or to the origin, to the destination?
I think these, I need to have a look how the climate policy initiative, how they compile the data, but this is more the snapshot of what's the global finance, which was kind of was made available from different sectors, from different sources, from public, from private, as well as non the social sector. And what was made available. And I think it's more in terms of implementation side, what was made available and then utilized. But yeah, I need to check on the climate. But I believe this information should be there on the website. But it doesn't relate to the only cooking and.
Is that fine for you, Mr. Kamara?
Yes, I'll go check their websites because when I see the figures like the one of concerning East Asia, for example, it seems very high compared to the one of the US, for example, America. So I was just skeptical about those figures, but I won't go back. I will go back to the website and check. Thank you.
Don't hesitate to get back to us if you find further sources of information. We are happy to have this discussion. Another question I was asking myself, Nishchai, have you observed tendencies or changes in the recent years regarding this climate finance landscape? Like, have there been actors gaining importance? Have there been new actors coming up, or some of them change their priorities and strategies?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question in terms of because it's always, I mean, we can track easily and it's available also online, the climate finance data, but sector specific climate finance data is more difficult also with the cooking energy sector. And also because in cooking energy, as I mentioned, it's more, it can be clean cooking, it can be improved cooking. So also to segregate this kind of data is a bit difficult. But if I speak right now on the overall climate finance trends, I think, as I said, as I highlighted also in the slides, the trend is more going upwards, that we see more climate finance available. And we have seen in the past with terms of climate finance negotiations in the in UNFCCC framework, the COP framework, we see that there's more tendency of governments funding providing more climate finance. We've seen that there was this goal that $100 billion per year from 2020 to 2025. It was not met in the first couple of years, but now 2022 onwards, there was this figure that it's been met and over met. I mean, there were more funds which are made available, and it's this from the public finance side of things, that the governments were giving development assistance, but then there is also more initiatives to engage private sector into these projects, because the private sector finance is also supports the climate action, which in kind of increases the overall finance flowing into climate action activities, both mitigation and adaptation. There is now more discussions on the adaptation side of things, and also we can relate to the finance, which is more specific to adaptation and loss and damage, which is also being negotiated in the current COP. There's also, because 2025 is the last year of this $100 billion goal annually, there is right now also a new climate finance goal, which is being negotiated, which will be negotiated in the COP next week, starting in a couple of weeks. So yeah, we expect more climate finance funds made available. I think the main thing is to see that because there is it's still limited. The trend is upwards. The climate finance is still limited, and the discussion also is now, from my perspective, in which sectors will attract more climate finance, and then there is also competition in that. So we need to make sure, in terms as project developers, that the pipelines are there. That's a project is designed in a way that can accommodate climate finance, that meets its requirements, that meets the eligibility criteria, as I mentioned. So these things are really important to consider, to have this kind of things. Yeah.
Great, thank you very much. Really interesting. There was one other question by Mr. Kamara on if you have any advice on how to get access to the preparation of the project proposal. We would need to go on in a second because we are already running a bit late, but if you could provide a short answer to this, that would still be very interesting.
Yes, I mean, as I said, just quickly, I understand that these certain funds can take a lot of time to prepare. It's not about only financial aspect, it's also about the technical aspects. If you have the experience, if you have the resources, I think it's good. I would advise, maybe if there's a small structure who wants to attract climate finance, to start maybe with a small fund or small resources, to develop this kind of expertise in getting climate finance. Because if you think that you have the necessary expertise, then you can develop a proposal in a way which has more chances to attract climate financing. And I think GIZ has experience, definitely has in the past also developed projects to not directly access climate finance, but help private sector, help companies, help NGOs to get to develop the expertise, to develop the capacity, attract the climate finance. So I think to have this kind of partner, which can support you financially and technically for long-term project development, can prove very useful. And definitely at the start, one can also think about not applying to very big funds. Maybe start with those funds who kind of prioritize small structures, for example, or prioritize your context, and which are known in the past to fund these kind of small projects, like, for example, ICI Small Grants, the International Climate Initiative, which are known to fund projects which are around 250,000 euros or less than that, maybe, which are specifically focused on small projects. So these kind of things, I think, can be really useful, and it's a step-by-step process.
Thank you very much. I see there is a hand raised by Mr. Bolaji. Sorry if I pronounce your name wrongly. I would suggest that we now move on with the next presentation, and however, we're happy to take up your question at the end during the discussion.
I can also answer in the chat right now. If you have any questions, you can post in the chat. I will answer there.
Very good proposition as well. Thank you very much. So I hand over to Jamie. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Anya. Our next presenters are Frederick Amariati, who is the Senior Energy Advisor and Technical Lead in the GCF project in Kenya. He'll be giving an overview to the project and insights to the contribution to Kenyan NDCs. This will be followed by Nidiaga Job, who is a Technical Advisor for Sustainable Development and Environment, representing the GCF project in Senegal. He'll be speaking in French and will be giving a presentation on the contribution of environmentally friendly cooking on Senegal's NDCs. So I ask all participants who do not understand French to please ensure that you are in the correct interpretation channel. And I just also would like to mention that the GCF project will be launching today their report on NDCs, and Anya will be sharing a link to this report in the chat if you would like to read up more on that report. So with that being said, I would like to hand over to Frederick. Thank you.
Frederick, we can't hear you yet. Frederick, you're unmuted, but it doesn't work. Yes?
Kenya, I can confirm. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Let me try not to use this. They might mess it up a little bit. So let me know if I'm not audible enough. But yes, thank you very much for Nishe, that very first piece of presentation. I think you've basically set the stage for us now to do one or two, three things. And yes, in the next few minutes, for me, is to provide a bit on experiences accessing one of the climate funds within the globe, the Green Climate Fund, and how we've been able to use the resources in our work, both in Kenya and Senegal. Then happy to provide or respond to any questions that are coming up. Picking up from what Nisha mentioned earlier, I think there are a couple of funds available at the moment. The interest is picking up. The question is, how do governments or projects
Sorry, Frederick.
take them to prepare them?
Frederick, I think your mic is breaking as you're speaking. It's cutting. Sorry about that.
All right, and now?
Yes, much better.
Okay, all right, so yeah, so we continue. So I mentioned earlier that Nisha already set the stage for this, and it's just to mention that there are a couple of climate-related funds around, a lot of interest coming up, especially from the cooking side, and I think it's for either governments or projects or players in the space to really develop the idea around some specific requirements. Talking about the eligibility criteria, I give an example. I posted something in the chat link on the GCF investment criteria. It would be nice for anyone to look at it, those who are interested in that. But yes, so what about the GCF project in Kenya and Senegal? You want to move the next slide? Yes, so the GCF project, as we call it, promotion of climate-friendly cooking in Kenya and Senegal, is focusing on reducing emissions by promoting what you're calling climate-friendly cooking or energy-efficient cooking solutions in both countries, Kenya and in Senegal. And in terms of implementation, we have a third component, which is the global team that's supporting inclusion in both countries. We began implementation in 2020 and we're moving all the way to 2025. We close out in September next year. In terms of the funding, we are funded by GIZ, the BMZ, sorry, and co-financed by the Green Climate Fund, one of the biggest funds at the moment on similar interventions. At both country level, Nyaga will talk about the Senegal, but on the Kenyan side, we working together with the National Treasury, the Ministry of Energy and Petroleum. And in Senegal, let me allow Nyaga to talk about that at some point. Within the GCF framework, we have different levels of implementation. So we have entities who are accredited entities at all levels. GIZ is playing this role, but also playing the role of executing entities and implementing partners. Next slide. Yeah, in terms of objectives, again, we mentioned we are within the mitigation track according to the GCF framework, and reducing emissions, ideally contributing directly to the Kenya government's NDC obligations. And this has been mentioned earlier. Most governments have made obligations to reduce emissions by a given margin by the year 2030, and Kenya is not an exception. And besides that, our goal is to ideally transform the improved cook stoves market in Kenya by responding to or addressing the key barriers on the supply side and the demand side, as well as adoption, replication, and application of similar interventions in other places. As a bigger part of what our global team is doing is to see the lessons learned from this and trying to see how best this can be replicated in other countries. Please all note that our project is based on on pilot basis. So we hope the lessons from this will be used in other countries or in other similar initiatives, or some of you will find them useful to use in your next designing of interventions. Next slide. Yeah, one of the things Nisha mentioned earlier is a question of how innovative is your project or intervention. And for us, it is one of in our case, we're looking at it from a market-based approach. So supporting both sides of the supply chain, the supply and the demand side measures. And for us, supply side, what we're doing is supporting the entrepreneurs in this value chain with some what we're calling machines, tools, equipments. Famously, we call them the fertilization kits, and as well as what you're calling the investment packages, things to do with construction or development of production spaces for the stove businesses. On the demand side, we're doing more awareness raising with the parent ministries, and a lot of this has happened through development and implementation of the BCC strategies at national level and at grassroots level. In terms of climate impact, we contribute to CO2 emission reductions at national level, hence contributing to the Kenya government NDC obligations. Besides these approaches, we have other co-benefits that we're realizing within the project, and these are related to health, gender, and job creation. Next slide. Yeah, zooming in a little bit on climate impact. So in terms of mitigation, we're trying to create what we're calling a self-sustaining market for ICS in Kenya, as well as in Senegal, which we expect that will lead to substantial reduction in emissions. The understanding here is as more households move away from the traditional ways of cooking to improve cooking solutions, we realize a reduction in the fuel used, as well as an equivalent reduction in emissions that are released into the atmosphere during the use of these fuels. On average, you're looking at between 25 to 50% emission reduction potential with similar solutions. Our calculations or how we determine emissions is based on the UNFCCC guidelines. Most of us are aware of that, and the calculation is mostly based on the quantity of wood saved as part of the usage of the solution at that household level. In terms of adaptation, we're trying increasing the number of households, individuals, and people accessing these solutions within the two countries. Next slide. On again talking about the same, so you look at more specific about the NDC contributions. We're looking to contribute to the NDC obligations both Kenya and Senegal in the areas of ICS coverage and emission reduction. You'll see in Kenya we have a target of 25.8 million tons by 2030. We expect the planned results for us about 5.38 million tons. But at the moment, until the end of 2023, we had achieved around 1 million tons. Similar thing for Senegal, 5.4 million within the NDC targets, and the contribution at the moment is about close to 1 million tons CO2 equivalents. Next slide. Yeah, so specific to Kenya, I've already mentioned that. In terms of emissions, we have contributed close to 1.5 million tons. Actually in both countries, and then in terms of the ICS sold, 1.1 million, which contribute directly to the emissions reduction. In terms of individuals accessing improved or low emission energy sources, about 13 million, and over 3,000 jobs have been created from both countries. Next slide. Yeah, in terms of steering, again, we have steering at 3 levels, the global, national, and subnational level, with most of the activities done at national and subnational level, the global team supporting the 2 teams in the countries and at the regional levels. We do this through 2 main governance frameworks. We have the project advisory board, which consists of mostly executing entities, that's GIZ and the political partners and a few other implementing partners. And then the project coordination committee, which has almost all the implementing partners. For the Kenyan case, we have a total of 8 implementing partners comprising of up to 4 executing entities. But again, among the executing entities, they also form part of the implementing partners pool. Happy to provide more details on that if required. Next slide. Yeah, and yeah, so in terms of monitoring, reporting, and verification, I think next slide, just to mention that as part of telling the story on emission reductions potential, monitoring, reporting, verification is a very important part within this whole thing. And how it's designed leads to a lot of transparency and the ability for the project teams to tell the story in a more transparent manner, which again can attract funding in the long run. Next slide. Yeah, so within the Kenyan case and the Senegal case, again, we look at issues around reporting at different levels, but our activities are more around 5 item areas. So it begins with data collection all the way to data compilation, verification, then aggregation, and then the reporting to the donor as per the most funding agreements that exist. In terms of data collection, I think from our end, we pick this from the very last mile entrepreneurs within the value chain who are producing the stoves. This is collected by the national and subnational teams. A lot of cleaning is done at this level, compiled, and then the verification part, which is done in 2 levels. So internal and external verification is done, after which we provide this data together to a global team for compilation and reporting. Verification, again, is important because it gives you an idea of whether data being reported is being falsified or it's actually the correct situation in the field, you know. And yes, next slide. So in terms of monitoring and for adoption, use, and performance, for every project you design, in terms of the solutions that you're admitting on the project, there's always something about the eligibility criteria. So in our case, we look at an ICS, either using a biomass solution or an improved biomass solution, either using firewood or charcoal, but also tested based on what we call the CCT or KPT criteria. We also go beyond that and look at the quality of access to cooking, a methodology that looks at very many other factors in the cooking discussion. So fuel availability, affordability, exposure to emissions or other health-related issues, safety, and convenience. In terms of understanding how the market is developing over time, we use what we call the Energy Access Market Development Scorecard to try and ascertain where the market is at the start of every project and monitor that through the implementation period to see what has changed over time, what has not, and what are the other potential areas for further interventions. We also have a stronger focus on gender. Within the project, we say gender is mainstreamed at every level. Every activity you do has a gender focus. And then one of the expectations is part of, or most of the work we do will lead to what we call knowledge increase on the advantages of adopting improved or cleaner cooking solutions. Overall, we expect a reduction in wood fuel use at household level based on the number of stoves adopted at households. And then ideally, in the long run, we are able to realize what we see as emission reductions. Next slide. Yeah, so now talking a bit about NDCs, next slide. And Nishay also alluded to this earlier. There's a whole discussion on NDCs and the potential that they have to contribute to, and the contribution that cooking space has to contribute to this at national level. And I think over 98 countries globally have clean cooking as part of their NDCs. And next slide. Can I give me a second?
Meanwhile, for those who have asked further questions, please see the answer by Nishai directly in the chat. And
Thank
hope
you.
your power is fixed, Frederick.
Yes, it's fixed.
Great.
Confirm. Okay. All right. Yeah. So for the Kenyan case, and as far as NDCs are concerned, I think Kenya is one of the countries that I say picks first on adopting some of these instruments to use to access climate finance in all respects. And next slide. In our case, I think Kenya has done a couple of what we call national communications on emissions reduction. Kenya has a couple of frameworks already in place, the National Climate Change Action Plans, which recognizes the role that each sector or the many sectors in our country contribute to emissions production within a given country. And yeah, the latest one that was done, I think we are projecting emissions from 2030 by 143. This is available for everyone and can be seen by anybody. And yeah, look at the different sectors. We talk about waste, industrial processes, and at the end of the day, we look at the energy demand sector where cooking is always discussed most of the time. We are rightly included here and we contribute a lot to this, as you'll see in the next slide. So yeah, so within the Kenyan NDC, and you look at the projections done around in the year 2020, most countries produce what we call the NDC technical reports, within which we do analysis of every sector contribution to emissions. You look at this whole space, you look at the energy demand side. In our frameworks, we have clear provision on what we need to do as a country to contribute to that overall NDC goal. And if you look at the energy demand side, so we're covering two aspects on improved biomass solutions, as well as more cleaner cooking solutions. So you look at the number of units that we need to take out to disperse or take out into the market for use at household level for us to be able to achieve this specific obligation. And so if you look at the next slide, you'll see now how this contributes more or how this is spread out. So you realize, again, look at charcoal and biomass from the modeling that was done. Biomass solutions. So the first two graphs contribute a majority to the sectors, the subsectors that need to contribute more on this obligation. And that's why for us as a government, like as a country, we looked at biomass cooking as a very important area to focus on. And basically this was the basis for our concept note to GCF. It was the basis for us now getting the financing that we have that we're using to implement our current project. Next slide. Yeah, and then I talked about some of the works that we are doing. So besides looking at just implementing the project, selling stoves, it's the easiest slang we use in terms of during our normal implementation discussions. We normally say there are other existing sector challenges, and we've talked about reporting and why it's very important to make sure it works out quite well. Overall, I think in most countries in sub-Saharan Africa, we do not have a well-elaborated MRV framework that can be used for reporting on the work that we are doing around NDCs. And I think if it's something that anyone could be listening, if you do not have such a framework, something you might want to work around it. I have a feeling there are a couple of financiers who like to support such initiatives, but all you need is to start off and see why do you need it and how do you need it. So specifically in the Kenyan case, we have just concluded on the knowledge management strategy, which also speaks a lot to issues around reporting in whichever sense you look at it. And now we are developing what you call a web-based knowledge management hub to harmonize all knowledge products in the cooking sector. And then as a way of bringing all the sector players together, we are developing what we call the cooking sector key performance indicators, ideally deriving them from what the reporting obligations we have as a country, and then structure them in a way that everyone in the sector finds time to discuss around them during the periodic sector meetings. But I think the most interesting one for us is the design and development of the energy consumption registry. This in two parts. One is developing the templates for data collection. And then the second bit is developing the tool that should be used by the partner ministry, in our case, the Ministry of Energy, to consolidate all the data on NDCs and then report to the Climate Change Directorate. Next slide. Yeah, and then maybe telling the story of our lives for the past 5 years between 2020 and now. This is how we've contributed to the NDC obligations for Kenya. And this is one single project, the promotion of climate-friendly cooking in Kenya. If you look at the graph, you see in blue are the projections that are there within our NDC technical report updated in 2020. And then in red is the numbers that the project has been able to contribute. So if you look at it, you realize that in 2022, 2023, and even 2024, 2020 to 2023, only one project was able to meet the government targets on biomass stove cells within the country, And in 2024, we are on track to exceed that by almost over 50%. And the indication here is you realize the targets are achievable. This is just one project, and this is a very good case of using such an approach to access more financing, that yes, you can directly contribute to a national obligation, in this case NDCs, but you require financing to do that. If you look at the actuals are based on the numbers of stoves reported through our MRV system, and the projections here are based on the national NDC report that was published in 2020. Next slide. Yeah, and yeah, so as I bring in my colleague Nyaga to pick up on the Senegal case, yeah, so the biggest thing here is we had a chance to use the investment criterion provided by GCF. Whatever we're doing falls within the Kenya government obligations, and it fits within the NDC obligations achievement. And that was really a good basis for us now to come down and be able to initiate a concept note for this. So Nyaga, ready?
Merci. Merci Frédéric. Donc, je m'en vais vous présenter le cas du Sénégal. Slide. Pour le Sénégal, je vais...
Next slide, please.
Next slide, please. Voilà. Pour le Sénégal, je vais d'abord rappeler l'objectif de la CDN du Sénégal. CDN, volet combustible domestique. Donc, dans sa CDN, le Sénégal a fixé un objectif de 800 000 foyers améliorés à distribuer par an à partir de 2030. Donc, l'objectif du Sénégal, c'est d'atteindre une distribution de 800 000 foyers améliorés par an en 2030. Là, c'est l'objectif inconditionnel. L'objectif conditionnel, c'est 1 500 000 foyers améliorés par an, toujours à partir de 2030. Donc, c'est un objectif qu'il faut avoir en tête. Et je rappelle aussi l'objectif du projet pour le Sénégal, à partir de notre impact, de notre modèle d'impact du projet, on a prévu de diffuser 586 000 foyers améliorés en 2025. Donc, ce sont ces deux objectifs qu'on a en ligne de mire du projet depuis le début, en 2020. Et de 2020, avec le Covid, on a vu que la filière des foyers améliorés au Sénégal s'était impactée. Mais à partir de 2021 et l'intervention du projet, avec tout ce que Frédéric a expliqué sur la professionnalisation, ça a permis de relancer le secteur, de montrer la capacité de résilience de la filière des foyers améliorés au Sénégal. Et on est remonté jusqu'à 200 000 foyers améliorés distribués en 2021. Lorsqu'on vient en 2022, on voit qu'on a presque doublé la distribution de 2021. On est passé à 414 000 foyers améliorés. Ça a montré qu'au Sénégal, il y a le développement de la demande qui est là. L'offre suit avec le travail qu'on est en train de faire dans le cadre de professionnalisation. En 2023, on a atteint 563 000, qui est proche de l'objectif du projet de 586 000. Donc, entre 2023 et 2024, on a atteint l'objectif du projet. C'était une distribution de 586 000 de foyers améliorés en 2025. Donc, l'objectif du projet est déjà atteint au premier semestre de 2024. Maintenant, si on regarde l'objectif de la CDN du Sénégal, qui est de 800 000 en 2030, On s'est dit avec la transformation actuelle qu'on a du marché des foyers améliorés au Sénégal, c'est possible de l'atteindre très tôt, avant la fin du projet. En 2024, actuellement, les données qu'on a collectées avec le système de collecte de vérification que Frédéric a expliqué tout à l'heure, depuis le terrain jusqu'au rapport, il y a un système de collecte et de vérification qui est établi sur l'ensemble des données. On est sûr que cette année, on va dépasser 700 000 foyers améliorés distribués au Sénégal. Ça veut dire qu'en 2025, si tout se passe bien, on va atteindre la cible de la CDN du Sénégal qui est de 800 000 foyers améliorés par an et qui était prévue en 2030. Donc, la transformation du marché des foyers améliorés a permis d'avoir une avance de 5 ans sur la cible de la CDN. Au lieu d'attendre 2030 pour avoir 800 000 foyers améliorés, les probabilités actuelles du marché montrent qu'en 2025, ce chiffre sera atteint. 800 000 foyers améliorés seront distribués en 2025. Maintenant, si on regarde ça par rapport à la proportion de la population, combien de ménages ont accès aux foyers améliorés? C'est important de voir parce que ça va venir lorsqu'on va actualiser la CDN du Sénégal, voir les combustibles domestiques. Ça va nous revenir. Les derniers recensements du Sénégal publiés montrent qu'il y a 2 millions de ménages au Sénégal. Si on fait la fraction 2 millions de ménages et 1,2 million de foyers améliorés, si on cumule les données de 2023 et de 2024, plus la 12e mois de 2024 qui va venir, on est presque à 1 200 000 foyers améliorés distribués au Sénégal, soit 60% des ménages ont un foyer amélioré au Sénégal. Là, c'est un chiffre qu'on doit avoir à l'œil. Ça va nous aider dans l'actualisation de la CDN qui va venir. Next slide. Là, c'est pour l'objectif de la CDN. Toujours dans la CDN, il y a un volet MRV. Quelle est la contribution du projet à accompagner l'État du Sénégal à mettre en place un système MRV pour les combustibles domestiques? Nous, on est parti du projet, élaborer une plateforme de suivi numérique et d'évaluation des activités du projet. Dans cette plateforme, NDEV et GIZ NDEV a eu accès. Les entiers d'exécution qui accompagnent la mise en œuvre du projet ENDA EcoPop, ENDA Energy Concept ont eu accès aussi. Le ministère de l'Énergie en charge de l'énergie, qui est responsable de la mise en œuvre de la CDN, volet combustible domestique, et aussi a eu accès à cette plateforme. Le ministère en charge de l'environnement, qui a la responsabilité du suivi et de la coordination des CDN du Sénégal, a aussi accès à cette plateforme. Donc, cette plateforme, c'est le point de départ qui va montrer le travail qu'on est en train de faire. Mais pour que ça soit une plateforme de suivi de la CDN combustible domestique, il faudra l'élargir à l'ensemble des acteurs du sous-secteur combustible domestique, y compris la cuisson avec l'électricité et aussi le GPL, gaz, pétrole liquéfié. Pour ce faire, on a déjà lancé un appel à candidature pour recruter un cabinet qui va d'abord faire une cartographie des acteurs. Quels sont les acteurs qui sont dans le sous-secteur des combustibles domestiques? Quelle est leur stratégie de collecte, de vérification et de reporting des données qui sont au niveau que ces acteurs appliquent? Et ça va nous permettre d'avoir une vue, ça va nous permettre de l'intégrer dans la plateforme qui est déjà en place. Aussi, de notre côté, quel est le système MRV qui sera beaucoup plus approprié pour le sous-secteur combustible domestique, depuis la collecte de données, comment les données sont collectées, comment les données sont vérifiées, comment le rapport est fait, quel est le rôle de chaque acteur, de chaque institution, le rôle des ministères, le rôle des acteurs qui sont sur le terrain. Donc, tout ce travail de système, tout ce travail doit être clarifié et mis sous un format qui va permettre au Sénégal d'avoir une proposition de MRV pour le sous-secteur des combustibles domestiques. Et ça doit être en lien, en link avec le secteur de l'énergie. Parce qu'au niveau du secteur de l'énergie, ils vont avoir une plateforme MRV. Et au niveau de cette plateforme MRV, on doit avoir accès à la plateforme du sous-secteur combustible domestique. Et aussi au niveau national, le ministère de l'Environnement va avoir une plateforme de suivi de l'ensemble de la CDN qui va regrouper l'ensemble des acteurs, l'ensemble des CDN sectoriels. Et ainsi, le ministère de l'Environnement aura accès à la CDN du sous-secteur de l'énergie. Du sous-secteur de l'énergie. Maintenant, dans cette étude aussi, on doit revoir l'objectif de la CDN. Le travail qu'on est en train de faire a permis à l'État du Sénégal d'atteindre son objectif qui est dans sa CDN jusqu'en 2020-2030. Et le processus national nous amène à réactualiser les CDN du Sénégal en 2025. Il faudra redéfinir les objectifs de la CDN pour les combustibles domestiques. Est-ce qu'on va aller jusqu'à 1500 fois améliorés à partir de 2030 ou bien 1 million de fois améliorés à partir de, ou bien 1,5 million de fois améliorés à partir de 2030? Donc là, ça sera dans un processus national de discussion entre les acteurs pour arriver à ce niveau. Voilà. Je vais terminer par un appui qu'on est en train de faire pour le ministère de l'Environnement qui va faciliter l'accès au projet foyer amélioré dans le marché carbone. Parce que le marché carbone actuellement fait partie aussi des sources de financement des projets. Et la plupart des porteurs de projets au Sénégal qui ciblent le marché carbone ont des projets de foyer améliorés. Et nous, on est en train d'appuyer l'État du Sénégal à réactualiser sa fraction de biomasse non renouvelable. La fraction de biomasse non renouvelable du Sénégal, la validité est dépassée, il faut l'actualiser. Et ce processus est actuellement en cours. On a lancé ce processus. Normalement, d'ici la fin d'année et début d'année prochaine, on aura la nouvelle fraction de biomasse de l'État du Sénégal qui sera utilisée par les projets foyers améliorés dans le calcul des émissions, dans le calcul de la réduction des gaz à effet de serre. Donc, ça va entrer dans la potentialité de réduction des gaz à effet de serre. Donc, c'est ce qu'on avait voulu partager pour le Sénégal, pour les actions qui concernent le Sénégal, mais particulièrement dans la contribution aux objectifs de la CDN pour le Sénégal. Merci. Je donne la parole à Frédéric qui va revenir sur la suite de la présentation.
Yeah, I think just to finalize, and as I remind us, Anya, you want to put in the chat section the reports on what we are doing, which we are launching today. Anyone here, feel free to look at it, interrogate it. I think we are available to provide any details. Focuses a lot on monitoring, reporting for NDCs, questions I've seen out there as well. But I think as we finalize and our main takeaways from our implementation over time, in most countries you realize, and I think most of the countries that could be included here, some of them might not be having the action plans that are required as a basis for engagements on issues NDCs. So thinking through how to develop this will be some good place to start from. And then even for some where NDCs exist, we do not have explicit provisions for issues clean cooking. Another good place for anyone with an NDC or an action plan that exists but it doesn't have provisions on cooking, you could start from saying how to include cooking in such actions plans. Then let me not say the word usual, most of us do not have MRB systems, at least let me say national ones, where we can track all contributions towards NDCs. And these are places that we also see as a challenge within this space. So any projects, interventions, or programs that can be developed to support this will be very helpful. In Kenya, we're trying to do that, but again, at national level, we might not do that. What we are doing is we are doing what we call a cooking sector reporting framework or provision for NDCs. But the biggest message for us is we realize and we know that cooking has a high potential for climate mitigation approaches. And it's an area that we should consider. It's gaining lots of traction within the space. And as mentioned by most of the speakers today, you just need to identify what idea, identify which fund you want to go for, what are the criteria for you to achieve that, to access the financing, then start it off. The honest message I will tell you is accessing the finance takes years. Our case took about 3-4 years just to be finalized. Preparation began around 2014. We began implementation in 2020. Lots of back and forth expected, so be prepared for that as well. In terms of methodologies for calculating emission reductions, there are many of them available. UNFCCC provides guidance, there's the gold standards. So we have a host of approaches to use in this regard. I'm not sure there's a next slide. All right, yeah, so thanks everyone, but happy to respond to any question. There are a couple of questions we saw in the slide, and I don't know, Anya, I think we can provide a response to some of them after this. But if there are any burning ones, depending on you, Anya, let's see if we can respond to them.
Unfortunately, we need to close now. I'm handing over to Jamie, and we managed to answer quite a lot of questions already in the chat. So I hope that's fine. Otherwise, don't hesitate to reach out to us. And from my side already, thank you to the speakers. Thank you to the audience for your questions and interest. And with this, handing over now to Jamie.
Thank you, Anya, and thank you to Friedrich, Nishe, and Niaga for your presentations. It was both insightful. I'm sure a lot of the participants are eager to find out more about what opportunities there are for climate financing for their relevant projects. So with that being said, I also would like to thank all the participants for your active participation during this webinar. Thank you for your contributions and the questions you have asked. Please feel free to reach out to Friedrich, Nishe, or Niaga on any questions you still have regarding their presentations. The webinar recording as well as the presentations will be shared with you all as part of postcoms, as well as the resources that were shared in the chat that Anya has provided us with. So with that being said, I want to thank you all. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And thank you again for joining us today during this webinar.